I don't think that the psychedelic drugs are drugs at all in the sense they don't cure any physical illness. They're not drugs like heroin, they're not drugs even like alcohol. They're instruments which expand consciousness, they speed up the mind. Chemicals are the keys which open up and speed up, expand the mind.
Hello everybody, welcome to the final episode in our psychedelic mini-season. My name is Adrian Smith and I am joined by my incredibly high co-host Rod Barnett.
Okay, I'll go along with this. Yes, high as a kite. High as a kite. Hello everyone down there beneath me.
I keep telling you not to go into the Orgone Accumulator before we podcast.
Yeah, we need to discuss that weird phone booth, yes.
Anyway, so here we are, post Black Friday sales, all a little wiser and a little poorer.
Yes, there is that.
But I hope you had a good Thanksgiving, Rod.
Yes, actually. And as with all Thanksgivings, I intend to eat more than I should. And this year, boy, did I accomplish that. I made it home and then had every intention to be awake for a few more hours. And the turkey juices overwhelmed me, and I fell asleep on the couch and then had to transfer to the bedroom. So yeah.
Sounds like a successful day.
I think so.
And did you indulge in the Black Friday Blu-ray sales?
Not really. I did pick up, I did order a few things here and there from the various things that were being released by the boutique labels. I went ahead and splurged on the Lamberto Bava 4-film set from Cauldron because...
I know. That looks amazing.
Well, the thing is, I mean, that's the joy of Cauldron is they seem intent on focusing on lesser known Italian exploitation stuff from the late 80s, early 90s, which is a bit of a blind spot in most instances for me. So it has been a joy to just watch them do what they're doing. The recent Houses of Doom box set was a good example. And you and I got to participate with that. But this set, I know of all 4 films from Lamberto Bava, or Baby Bava, as we jokingly have referred to him for years amongst my psycho friends. And I remember the ogre being sometimes called, like Demons 3 or 4, or who knows, all the retitlings on video for different things. And the other films, I think I've seen all but one of them. But it's going to be a real joy to be able to go back to them and see them with, first to see them in sparkling clarity, because a couple of them I only ever saw on bootleg. And so, yeah, looking forward to that. I could not resist Severin's release. It's Vinegar Syndrome's release of The Keep. Although I have to admit to waiting several days before pulling the trigger on it, because I was disappointed. Here's the thing. I am fascinated by Michael Mann's film, The Keep.
Yeah.
I am a huge fan of the source novel, and it has been a point of irritation for decades that the film seems to have jettisoned huge chunks of itself to get it near to the 90-minute long running time. And then knowing and having been able to see on YouTube the huge chunks of that film that are added back into TV screenings of it over the decades, and seeing that, they really just hacked huge chunks of this thing out, making it mildly incomprehensible, I will admit.
Yeah.
And to notice, frustratingly, that the first Blu-ray release of The Keep, also a 4K release, I would point out, is devoid apparently of those extra sequences, and that is a true disappointment.
Yeah, that's a bit weird.
Unless they are somehow on there but hidden, or what I'm assuming is that there is some legal problem with them obtaining that stuff to add onto the disc as some kind of extra. But it's frustrating to, as I lay out, $30 or $35 or whatever I'm paying for this disc, that I am still going to feel that it is essentially incomplete.
Yeah.
Well,
Imprint in Australia have announced that they're putting one out as well, so maybe they'll find the missing stuff.
Well, that's just it. It's not a question of finding it. You can. I haven't gone looking for it recently. I haven't gone looking for it recently, but you used to be able to see it on YouTube. So
that's weird.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes, the sales have been. I've spent a lot of money lately, and I'm going to stop now because it's too. I'm running out of shelf space.
Well, I have to tell you, the sales. I did take advantage.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk Black Friday sales, there is one thing that I could not resist at the price point of $15, which was one of my favorite childhood cartoon series on Blu-ray for $15, The Herculoids. So,
Wow.
and if you've never heard of it, I don't blame you.
Well, you got to do these things, haven't you?
I do. I certainly do.
Excellent. My biggest purchase, if we're talking about Black Friday purchases, was the German 34-disc Krimi set.
Ah, yes.
Which is very nice and was still, it was over £100, but reduced considerably over the Black Friday weekend. So I've been wanting to buy it for like 3 years, so I just went for it. And not all of them have got English subtitles, sadly, but I think about 20 odd have. So that will keep me busy for a few years, I imagine.
Oh, it's good stuff. It is frustrating
really
that there are a few of the films that don't have English, an English dub or English subtitles. But I've had a couple of the 3 or 4 film sets that they originally released those in. A kind German friend, a listener to my various podcasts, sent them over to me one year, and let's just say that they've been in the player multiple times. It's great stuff.
Yeah, they're great. But anyway, enough about spending money. We are being true capitalists here, Rod. We're like middle-class bourgeois capitalists.
It's true.
And we need to get into the revolution. This is my attempt at a segue.
It's pretty good considering how many times the word revolution is uttered in the film we're going to talk about.
So, yes, here we are. And with our final film, La rivoluzione sessuale, or the sexual revolution. Incidentally, I love the theme for this. I think the music is great. It's composed by somebody I've never heard of, Teo Usueli. And there was a soundtrack album actually put out, but only on CD, about 5 years ago. I mean, is that somebody that you're familiar with? They just seem to have done quite a lot of obscure Italian films. But I think the theme is great.
Well, I'm a fan of the music, but I'll be honest, I'm unfamiliar with the composer. I like it, but it has escaped. They have escaped me as far as having run across them before in the past. Good stuff, though.
Mm-hmm. He did a film in 1972 called Hotbed of Sex. I wonder what that's about.
I suspect it's mostly about cooking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just your usual like spy films and peplum films and all of that, but they're all very much films that no one ever talks about and I've never heard of. But yeah, I think the theme is great. So there's some good music in here. There's some quite groovy sequences where they're all dancing to the jukebox as well, which is fun. But yeah, anyway, La rivoluzione sessuale. So I need to justify why I chose this, right?
Yes, I was about to say, if we're going to do this, you've got to explain to the good people and to your co-host why we have wedged this film in with other films that seem at least partially, if not completely, in the realm of the LSD/acid film.
Well, okay, so I suppose my thinking was that this is a great example of a film that was very much of the psychedelic youth rebellion/revolution zeitgeist of, I mean, I presume they were writing this in late 67 into 68.
Yeah.
Because the film was released in Italy at the end of October 1968. So there's this sexual, cultural, psychedelic revolution, and there's basically one sequence in here that has no reason to be there and doesn't seem to be connected with anything other than the filmmakers wanting to tap into that sort of psychedelic mode. So although there's no actual drug taking, there is kind of some sci-fi Barbarella style stuff going on that we could talk about in a minute. But yeah, fair's fair. There's no actual drugs, but if you take it to the more broad psychedelic season kind of definition, then there's one scene at least that I think definitely fits that description.
Yeah, there is definitely one scene that stands out as narratively unjustifiable. Well, a sequence that essentially does not fit the film surrounding it at all, and could be exactly what you would expect to see in a film in which all of the participants on screen had at some point just before this sequence dropped acid. It's like, oh, okay, so this is either in their minds or it's some kind of shared hallucination or something along these lines. But no, I'm not. It's let's just put it this way: the sequence we're speaking about could be removed from the film, wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into specifics when we try and attempt to do a plot summary, but yeah, it is pretty interesting. But let's get to the main point of interest really for this film. For me, this feels like the great lost Dario Argento film.
Well, he did co-script write it, yeah.
Yeah. So he wrote this alongside the director, Riccardo Ghione. And this was around the time when he was basically a director for hire. Start that again. This is around the time he was a writer for hire, I should say. Because this came out when he had loads of films coming out. So let's say there was one called 5-Man Army, Probability Zero, Love Circle, also, which I have a poster for, incidentally, called Metti una sera a cena, Imagine an Evening and Dinner, which is about middle-class people seducing each other. There's a bit of a theme, I think.
Yeah.
And he'd also written Today We Kill, Tomorrow We Die, Commandos. Like, he'd worked on quite a few films, famously, of course, Once Upon a Time in the West.
Of course.
But also Cemetery Without Crosses, which is a great Western. But I thought that because of Argento's connection with this film, there would be more interest around it. But unbelievably, on the IMDb, there is one review. The IMDb's been going for about 20 years. And only one person has written a review of this film on it. And then I looked on Letterboxd, and again, one review. It might be the same person. There's only one. So only two people in the world have written reviews on the main kind of review websites.
Which is a little odd.
Yeah, considering that because considering this is Argento and this is just before he directed his first movie, you just think there'd be a bit more curiosity. But this is it's not an easy film to see.
Well, there is that. How common is how common is it to find an English-friendly version of it, just for those of us freaks like you and I?
I mean, I had to I downloaded a transfer of a print without subtitles, and then I managed to find some English subtitles that are actually quite good, and then I had to manually match those together so that we had a print with English subs. So it's not easily available. It was only, as far as I can tell, released in Italy in 1968 and then disappeared. Somebody somewhere has done a kind of grey market DVD of probably the same print that we saw. But yeah, it just surprises me. I mean, it's not even. I just checked in Dario Argento's autobiography, and it's not in there. He doesn't mention it. He doesn't mention Riccardo Ghione.
Which is odd.
Yeah, so it just, for me, I mean, I'm nowhere near being an Argento completist. There are people who've been Argento fans much longer than I have. It just seems surprising that there's less curiosity around his sort of writing for hire. Or maybe this was a passion project. Unless we could ask him, I don't know how we'd ever know.
It would be interesting to get a question or two to him about this film. What how involved he was. Is there what he remembers about it? If he has any knowledge of the production at all, that'd be great, because like I say, his whatever relationship he may or may not have had with the co-writer and director, I would really love to know what the dynamic was.
Yeah, and the director, so Riccardo Ghione, is quite obscure too.
True,
unfortunately. And again, written quite a lot of films, most of which never heard of, and also directed just a few of them, including this one and another one called A Cold Heart. He's probably best known for his horror film, The Bloodstained Lawn, about a guy who builds a robot that sucks people's blood and replaces it with wine. That's the plot. That's the plot summary I read.
That's I would watch that. That's interesting.
Well, exactly, right? We're all here for that.
Yeah.
But I've been unable to find really any information about him aside from his birth and death. He died in 2003, aged 81. I did find that Roberto Curti has written about him. He wrote an article in an Italian magazine called Blow Up several years ago. But apparently that film that I just mentioned, Il Prato Macchiato di Rosso, The Bloodstained Lawn, that film is thought of as a camp folly in Italy, apparently. So I don't think his reputation is particularly high. But then it turns out that Roberto Curti also wrote about him in his book. What was that called again? Mavericks of Italian Cinema.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately neither of us have.
No, I've been able to read the introduction to the book, which has a little bit of information about him, but I would love to be able to read the chapter specific to this director, but unfortunately only learned of this book recently, and interlibrary loans take time, folks.
Yeah. So what does it say in the intro about him?
Well, the book that Curti wrote focuses on 8 different filmmakers, and he's pointing to these folks. I mean, one of them is like Giulio Questi or Questi. I think it's.
Oh yeah. So he's the Death Laid an Egg guy, right?
Right, but the director of this film is also Ghione is also spoken about, and I'll just quote this from the introduction, which gives an idea of why I would be curious to read more about this particular filmmaker. It says, the peculiar career of Riccardo Ghione, the unsung gray eminence behind a truly revolutionary project, the ill-fated Documento Mensile, an attempt at reuniting renowned personalities from various artistic and cultural fields who would express themselves with a movie camera. Now, from what I can tell, this would have been a 1951 film, and I'm not sure if he was trying to do a follow-up. This is unclear from what I can read here. But basically referring to this project as ill-fated seems pretty straightforward, since I can find almost no reference to it other than a screening of it, which is what listed as a 1951 film.
Oh, I mean, that's quite early, 51.
Right.
And this film is 1968 that we're talking about today.
So what I'm wondering is, since it's described here as an attempt at reuniting renowned personalities from various arts, I'm wondering if what Ghione may have been attempting to do is do a follow-up to the 1951 film, but I'm not sure. So
okay, interesting.
He also says in Ghione case, he would take the neo-realism experience to its extremes. The whole idea behind the Maverick filmmakers he picked for this book being that most of them got their first steps in filmmaking in documentaries,
Right.
which he describes as a forced passage for many directors at the time, not least because of economic reasons, given the law benefits granted to these works. But then once we have directors such as this being able to move into making actual narrative films, apparently a lot of these folks are a bit more successful than others. I mean, there's a lot of talk about how Alberto Cavallone, and I'm probably mispronouncing his last name, how he moved kind of in and out between striding over the line into porn once you get into the 80s and doing other kind of things. But a number of these filmmakers, and with Ghione apparently being one of them, having dabbled in things that would eventually lead to Pasolini's Salo in 1975. And I would think that this film specifically that we're about to talk about would remind someone who's seen Salo of this film would remind them of Salo pretty heavily, mainly because there's a similar setup, although with a lot less violence and a lot less horror.
Yeah, thankfully it's only food they're eating in this film.
Yes. We do have this does focus only on adults having sex with each other, so there's that.
Yeah, he seems like, I mean, I'd like to read that as well now, because it's an interesting guy. Like he was a producer initially, and he produced a film in the 50s that was an episodic film with segments by Antonioni and Federico Fellini, Alberto Latuada, and that's, like you were just saying, like sort of the neo-realist end of things.
Yeah.
And then by the 1980s, he's writing scripts for films like Dirty Love 2.
I know.
So
I kept thinking as I looked through the titles he was associated with after this movie, is that, wow, did it just, did his needle get stuck in a groove and this is all people thought he could do, or is this just what he was drawn toward? I don't know.
Yeah, interesting to find out some more about him. The cast, again, relatively unknown to me except for a couple of them. Was there anybody in the cast you wanted to pick out?
Well, I mean, everybody's going to probably point toward Laura Antonelli, who, besides being, ravishingly beautiful, people would have known from a couple of fairly famous films. If you're a Western fan, you probably would have seen her in A Man Called Sledge in 1970. That's probably the first place I ever saw her. And then she was in Satyricon. She's been in a number of well-known European films over the course of her career, so she's well known. She's a lovely lady, of course. One of those. Once you learn a little bit about her background, it's not a shock to know that she was initially a model and a gymnast. She makes everything you can see her do on screen here. The bodily grace that she has. I mean, it shows that she's built to be filmed. She's a gorgeous lady, but also she is quite talented, I have to admit.
Yeah. Apparently she began her career as a high school PE teacher. So
as a gymnastics teacher. Yeah.
Yeah, that might explain some of the things that she does later on. She was also once convicted for dealing cocaine.
Well, yeah, in 91, cocaine was found in her home during a police raid. Now, that's who's to know why there was a police raid. If she was a dealer, that's one thing. But one does have to be straightforward and point out that this conviction of possession and trafficking was overturned on appeal, like 15 years later, but still, there is that sordid side of things later in her life.
And she did quite a lot of Italian sex comedies, which I know are your favorites.
Or not. Yes.
So quite a lot of those that all have great titles, and I've never really heard of any of them.
Secret Fantasy,
except a couple.
Sex and Willpower.
There's one called How Funny Can Sex Be? I mean, that is the eternal question, isn't it?
Well, I'm curious about the one that's the English translation translates as Big Bun.
She was in the Dr. Goldfoot film as well. The bad one.
Well, is there a good one?
the one that people don't like.
Oh, okay, there's that. We'll put it that way.
But anyway, so she's pretty interesting. She did a Fulci film, of course, but again, that was a comedy, so it's one that no one really ever talks about. Maybe we'll do some Fulci comedies one day.
I was about to say there, and I may be this may be the sound of me drawing a scalpel across my own throat, but the idea of doing like a mini season of almost completely unknown early Fulci films, which would inevitably drag us through the dirt of comedies, would be interesting. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we did do a Fulci comedy, of course. I mean, how could I forget Franco and Ciccio?
Which means that clearly, if we can mark today's date and the date we recorded that podcast, that's how long it takes for me to forget the pain.
Yeah, that's true. It was about 3 years ago now. So
So we now have a measure.
The other cast recognizable for me anyway, the most recognizable cast member is Riccardo Cucciola, who plays the main professor. And when you look at his credits, he's been in hundreds of things. But what I recognize him from is Rabid Dogs. He's the car driver,
exactly,
with the child on the back seat, which is interesting.
And he's very good. I think Rabid Dogs may have been the first place where I really paid attention to him, of course, 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago. Oh my God. Anyway, long time ago. And he's very good in this as well. And it's, he's a good actor. I mean, his list of credits is 700 miles long. It's crazy.
Yeah. And then lots of other beautiful people, young and old.
Yeah.
So the summary is that 14 people, 7 men and 7 women, gather together in a sort of off-season seaside hotel, which did remind me very much of, what's it called? Daughters of Darkness, in that kind of slightly depressed off-season seaside empty hotel. And I live by the seaside, and it is quite depressing off-season. But they all get together in this hotel that has been booked out by the professor, Misrioli, or whatever his name is, to conduct an experiment. And so I was doing a bit of digging to find out more about the theories that he's espousing.
Yes.
It's not all just made up for the movie, it turns out.
No, it's a real thing out there in the real world for our frightening discovery, yes.
Yeah, based on a protege of Freud, an Austrian psychiatrist and psychoanalyst called Willhelm Reich. I mean, he couldn't sound more...
frighteningly German?
Yeah, German, Austrian, could he? Willhelm Reich. And he wrote loads of books that have been quite interesting and influential. He wrote one called The Mass Psychology of Fascism in 1933, which I imagine was sitting on a lot of people's shelves in that period of the European history. But anyway, so he kind of came up with all this stuff, and eventually ended up in America. And he died in prison, actually, in Pennsylvania, age 60 years old, while he was awaiting a trial because something, I don't quite understand what he did, but I think basically his publications were accused of being pornographic or something. I don't know. Something, you know what America's like, right?
Unfortunately, yes, I do.
But he is the man who came up with this theory of the orgone, which is why in this film we have the what's it called, the Orgone Accumulator,
which was a real thing.
Yeah, and it's very much like the Orgasmatron, basically.
And now it's bizarre to realize that the Orgasmatron, that bizarre thing that was used in, well, a variation of used in several different movies, including Sleeper, the Woody Allen film. Mm-hmm. The whole concept springs from this real thing that that Reich created.
Well, you say real, you say this real made up thing.
Well, okay, yeah. So it's a real thing that actually exists in the real world, not just on film, but it is insane and ridiculous. Yes.
Yeah.
Because you see, Reich developed a theory that the ability for someone to feel sexual love depended on their physical ability to have sex, as determined what he called orgastic potency. And he attempted to measure, the male orgasm in a number of different ways. We won't go into that.
I mean, there's only one way to measure that, isn't it? I don't
know. Not if you're Reich. He was weird. Well, he believed that the force that he was measuring was a distinct form of energy present in all living things. And so, in his psychoanalysis work, he drew conclusions from working with patients and extrapolated his own experience into theory. The most notorious of these was the orgasm theory. And of course, this is where he ended up believing that the libido was not a psychotic disturbance, but a system with a somatic function. He drew from Freud's idea that sexual neurosis is like the neurosis resulting from an intoxicating chemical substance. So, his thought was that by maintaining homeostasis in the human body, you could make people more fulfilled and more happy. So he believed that orgone is a primordial cosmic energy that was omnipresent and responsible for everything from the weather to the color of the sky, gravity, and emotions and sexuality. So
he thought the northern lights were a kind of visual manifestation of the orgone in the atmosphere.
Correct. So he believed that his orgone accumulators could provide a treatment for, everything from cancer to sexual dysfunction. So that's, by the way, what got him in trouble with the FDA in the United States. I don't know if that's exactly what ended up with him.
I've tried reading the case and I don't quite understand what happened, but they started calling them sex boxes, and then he moved things across state lines, which in America is a big no-no, right? You can't. There's all kinds of things you can't cross state lines with, and that was something to do with that. Apparently. Yeah, you can't take your sex box to the next state.
Which is luckily, I think they may have carved out things for people's sex toys, thank goodness. But still, you don't want to be walking around with a box that's an obvious hoax.
So there's one of these things on the road. When they visit the character that's basically William Burroughs, he has one of these in his garden that he uses. William Burroughs, which kind of brings us back to psychedelics, because he was into all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and it is the idea of this box which they've got, which they've brought with them to this deserted seaside villa.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Or hotel, I should say.
Let's get back to the plot. Yeah.
They brought this thing with them. And from what I can tell, it seems in the film, they never speak directly about it, but it seems to be just something to make the women horny. And that's all.
Yeah. It's like a phone box that you just kind of step in, and there's not. I don't even know if they're pressing a switch. I think there's a light on in there.
I don't even remember a light. Is there one? There could have been.
I don't know. The professor mentioned something about magnets, I'm sure he does. But I mean, the real orgone machines, or boxes. It's basically a wooden box. Then you alternate layers of organic and non-organic material. So it's like wood, then metal, then wood, and you sit in there. I mean, it would just sounds to me like it would just be really hot, but not in a sexy way. Just in a I'm sitting in a metal box kind of way.
And without poking some holes in it, one could maybe
exactly.
start getting a little problem with carbon dioxide. I don't know.
But they don't even close the door. They leave the door open on their orgasmatron in this film. So I don't know. It's very peculiar. But anyway, so I searched around, and the best I could find for plot summary / review was on the Cinema Italiano database. So thank you to those people. We've used their site before on the podcast to translate it into English. But again, it's like this is the only blog entry I could find about the film. Like, people haven't even blogged about it, which, again, considering the amount of things people blog about, seems surprising. Right, shall I have a go at reading the introduction?
Yeah, go for it. I can't wait to hear this, and I'm also a little chuffed that we're apparently breaking new ground here talking about this film.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's our MO, kind of. 14 people, 7 men and 7 women, young and old, bourgeois and proletarian, some linked by family ties, as well as married couples, gathered in a closed hotel, isolated from the world, rented for the occasion. The aim is to conduct a laboratory experiment, a social experiment on the theme of free love. Now, my first, if I was peer reviewing Professor Misiroli's experiment, if he presented this to a board for approval before conducting the experiment, I would suggest that if you're conducting a free love experiment, you don't take your wife and child. Like, there shouldn't be a mother. There should not be a mother and a son in the same group.
Agreed.
When the idea is that they all have sex with each other. That's just going to lead to some serious issues.
Also, I would point out that this attempt, I mean, this is far from the only attempt, of course. This is just the idea that's put forward occasionally, that if we could just somehow get the human emotional experience to divide itself away from linking sexual attraction to actual love, then we could all live happier, healthier lives. And sorry, it never works out that way. I don't want to spoil anything, but no experiment of this type has ever worked out. So I suspect it never will.
Yeah. Because although he's old and bourgeois and whatever, but he's got some younger people with him too. And it's clearly about free love. This is really tied in with, it's kind of like this clash between Catholic values and the actual sexual revolution. So the idea is that he holds a chair in psychology at a university somewhere, although I can't imagine he does for much longer after this experiment goes
no,
horribly
not after
wrong.
this goes as badly as it does.
And so he talks about this civilization that he's researched where people are free to be promiscuous as long as they don't fancy each other. Well, sorry, I should say more. It's more than that. As long as there's no feeling for each other.
Yeah, as long as the relationships are just physical.
Yeah, they can't. As soon as there's a slightest bit of
emotional attachment,
then that's off. But if you don't want to fall in love with them, then knock yourself out. And he says that if people can live more like that, they can break the moral code, and it will lead basically to world peace. Am I summarizing that correctly?
That is his harebrained theory, yes.
I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
Other than everything.
So yeah, that seems to be his theory. So the way they do, well, do you want to? I won't just read this whole thing out. Do you want to describe his methodology for this experiment? They're going to be there for a week, I think.
Yeah, I think 10 to 12 days, because they're going to be there just right up until the hotel would actually open for the season. So this is the middle of May.
So they gather everyone together in the evening to set up the experiment. Can you sort of describe how it works?
Oh, certainly. So the couplings are chosen by lot. It's completely random, and you're supposed to once the random choices are made, you're supposed to then go off and spend the evening with whoever. I mean, of course, you're not required to actually engage in sexual activity, but you're that pairing is that evening's pairing, and then of course it resets the next day, and they do it again.
Now we say random, but there is it's purely heterosexual.
Oh, yeah. That's the first thing it's good to point out is that homosexuality does not appear to exist in this film.
No.
There does not seem to be same-sex attraction in any way, shape, or form, which I thought was a tad odd. But since this is a film that is focused on what I would refer to as the quaint form of sexual revolution, in other words, the heterosexuals only are invited to this sexual revolution. This game of musical beds only involves opposite sex couplings. So there's a whole world of conversations that are just being excluded from this on purpose. And I don't know if that's supposed to reflect a flaw within the character of the man who's running this particular experiment, or if this is something that the filmmakers needed to adhere to keep the film from becoming, let's just say, unreleasable in its native country. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because he's going to all these lengths to conduct this scientific experiment, but this was going on all the time in the UK. But instead of drawing lots with names on pieces of paper, people just chucked their keys into a bowl.
That is what I have heard. Yeah. That is apparently why there were so many fistfights in Irish pubs throughout the.
And they made a lot of movies about that in the 70s in the UK. It was a common theme.
Were they all comedies, or were there serious dramas?
No, some of them was. There's like the wife swappers. They're kind of pretending to be documentaries about this shocking suburban secret stuff that's going on. But
my.
But because some of these couples that are gathered are married.
Yeah.
There's this one who's there with his mum, which, I mean, really, no. And then at one point there's a big joke because their names get drawn out together. So then he puts them back in the bowl, draws them out again. It's the same again, which was really funny.
Well, here's the first thing that everybody should have thought of before this is not just what we were describing there, the mother-son possibility of the possibility of that pairing happening and them having to short circuit it to keep that from being something that crept into the actualities on screen, but also if you bring your obviously virginal son to an event in which sex is supposed to take place, you kind of got to think at least one step down the road, which is he's going to lose all control of his emotions. There's just no way around it.
Yeah, he falls in love on the first night.
Of course, which I mean,
you would.
We've all been well. Okay, all of us heterosexual males. I gotta tell you, we all have the same problem. Probably the heterosexual females as well. Maybe it's universal and it doesn't matter what your sexuality is, but that first sexual encounter is very difficult to tame emotionally.
Yeah. And especially if your first night is with Laura Antonelli.
Well, there is that.
There's also an undercover journalist who's keeping a diary.
Yeah.
There's regular dancing around the jukebox, which is quite fun and very 60s. I mean, this film is so dated.
Yes. Dated. The dancing sequences I actually found to be actually entertaining, mainly because it is one of those weird things where you can easily imagine the filmmaker just saying, "We need." Dance.
What do young people do?
Yeah, exactly. We need something that shows them being carefree and somewhat open to the idea of physical or sexual liberation. What will we have them do? And it seems one of the most natural things within the film, beyond just the very stereotypical and obvious ways in which people's emotional reactions occur. and I'm kind of entertained by that. Plus,
Yeah.
it is very it's kind of amazing to watch someone like Laura Antonelli dance, because you can see that she how well she moves. It
Yes.
wasn't a shock to learn she was a gymnast. That's she's very very adept at movement. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And I have to admit, maybe it's just because the print isn't great, but I was constantly losing track of who everybody was.
A little bit. 14 characters do become a bit much to keep nailed down when we're really only basically introduced to them, and there's very little in the way of character differentiation until we get down to the point where some of the characters have left.
There's one guy who'd clearly been reading Clockwork Orange, because he only appears to be able to make love if he's listening to Beethoven's Fifth.
I know, which was amusing to say the least.
Yeah. And there's another guy, this reminded me very much of our previous film, Acid. There's a young guy who's paired up with an older woman, and he takes her into the ballroom area of the hotel, picks up a guitar, and immediately just starts singing some folk song about Castro. And she is not interested at all.
No, and that's the sequence where that whatever that song is, and maybe it's a pre-existing song, I don't know, but it involves using the word revolution so many times. It's like, okay, I got it,
Yeah.
understand. I see why this is here.
Rivoluzione, ti voglio qui. Rivoluzione, dimmi Fidel, dimmi dov'è. Ormai non c'è più Robespierre.
Yeah, it's like just one of those insufferable student protesters that pop up in these films, and which appeared constantly in our previous film. So yeah, you got all these kind of people, and then they're just hopping in and out of each other's rooms every night, occasionally popping into the accumulator. There's a couple who get bored and go on a drive to visit a nearby village,
which is very picturesque. This is something I think we should point out. This is a film that I think, and of course, be far from the first time you and I have said something along these lines, but the film, I think, might be an absolutely gorgeous movie if we could get a really pristine high definition print, because this is filmed on a lot of gorgeous, physically beautiful locations, and the cinematographer was no slouch. This looks great. I've seen some of the work this particular cinematographer has done. He directed, he was director of photography on The Third Eye, a film that you can actually see on Blu-ray these days. It's part of that.
It's great.
That set. It's a very good film, and I do recommend it. And then I just recently watched the spaghetti western, The Belle Star Story. He photographed that as well.
I just watched that recently as well. It's really good.
It's a good film. He did this and Top Sensation and right, Four Gunmen of the Holy Trinity, which is on my list of spaghettis that I need to get to eventually. But this film, shot in these real world locations, I'd love to see this cleaned up. I really would, because it looks, even in this muddy, not great version that we have available to see, it looks beautiful. And I would really like the chance to get a longer, better look at this. But you were talking about earlier the whole setting it at a seaside hotel out of season. What it really reminds me of is a lot of Jess Franco films. That setting is identical to roughly, 40, maybe 50 Jess Franco films. And it is that kind of these beautiful resort areas that are somewhat deserted because it's the off season. So there's this gorgeous emptiness.
They're cheap locations, I imagine, at that time of year too.
Well, yeah, but they lend themselves beautifully to what Franco was attempting to capture emotionally, and it adds immeasurably to what I think the filmmaker was trying to do here, which is to have this empty but beautiful place kind of representing some of the people involved in this story as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all shot in Tuscany. There's a little
Yeah.
seaside resort called Orbetello, and then they go off to a village up in the hills, which I think is Grassetto.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, I'm always looking at property in Tuscany. I'm one of these people who just browses property websites. Man, Tuscany is beautiful, and property is cheap. Let's just yeah. Oh, you mentioned Top Sensation, a young guy who falls in love with Laura Antonelli, Ruggiero Mitti. He's also in Top Sensation. So
Yes, he is.
there's another connection. But yeah, so anyway, they experiment. As you can probably imagine, it all generally goes a bit wrong because it's impossible to put aside your moral code, and it's impossible not to be in love with people.
Yeah.
That's kind of the moral of the story. And the professor ends up with a punch in the face.
Yeah, because
but-
he does an incredibly stupid thing.
He really does. It's what he was trying to prove. I don't want to give it away in case anyone else wants to watch
I think
it,
he
but-
was trying. I honestly think that at that point in the story, he was attempting to find something because he had just mentioned violence, and so I
Yeah.
think he was attempting to make what happens happens.
Or was he trying to make his wife jealous?
No, I don't know.
Maybe.
I
I
think
don't
that he
know.
may have been just because we have these two people show up at the end of the film who are there on their honeymoon and are not part of this group, and he attempts to bring them in and
Yeah.
kind of ambushes them about this. I think that he was attempting to find a way to blow this up because he saw his experiment falling apart.
Yeah.
And he either wanted to try to do something outrageous that would prove his point one way or the other, or something that would just blow the whole thing up. So
It reminded me of the young couple who turn up in Castle of Blood on their honeymoon. Like if you're turning up to a deserted hotel on your honeymoon and you
Yes.
get invited into this deserted hotel by some quite strange looking people, just go and find another hotel. That's what I would
perhaps
say.
back out into the vehicle and keep going.
Mm-hmm. We should get into our psychedelic sequence because that's why everybody's here.
Yes.
I think it's the day after the first night when we see with the cameras kind of panning across our group as they sit on blankets under the trees, enjoying the weather, eating food. Some of them are dancing, and I think it's the second day.
I think
camera-
so, because what I honestly thought was that this sequence we're about to talk about was going to be. I started to wonder if maybe some of these folks were like part of some kind of theater troupe. I honestly did, but the fact that it doesn't reoccur throughout the rest of the movie, I
Yeah.
thought perhaps this kind of sequence was going to be something that was going to reoccur. That's how we were going to kind of count the days.
Yeah. So how would you describe that to somebody who hasn't seen it, which is probably everybody listening?
Poorly staged, body painted weirdness.
There's an interesting, because the editing is quite good. They cut very fast at
Yes.
times between this panning shot of the people sitting outside by the trees, because then we're in a studio clearly, but there are trees inside as the camera pans around this room full of people painted gold. Not exactly naked, but quite various levels of undress, I guess.
Yeah.
What are they doing? They're kind of rolling around.
I don't. I got the image in my head of like cavorting satyrs. But that's just something that the way the images are cut seems to provide. There's that weird. I don't want to call it a chair, but something that looks like a chair. That's like a bunch. It looks like a bunch of artistic, oversized French fries that people can recline upon. It's very strange.
Oh yeah, it's a kind of. That's right. Yeah, there's a woman lying on it. It's like a sort of foamy.
Yeah, it looks like foam rubber, or not foam rubber, but just like foam that would be inside a chair.
Yeah, it's like if a sea anemone had been turned into a cushion.
That's there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all wearing wigs as well, I think.
Yes, this is true. Although it should be stated that a couple of the female characters do seem to have brought an entire bevy of both outfits and wigs.
Yeah. The way that they're dressed and painted reminds me of. Have you ever seen the year of the Sex Olympics? The Nigel
No,
Neal
no, I've wanted to because,
thing.
of course, the writer I'm a huge fan of.
That's worth watching. I think that was around the same time as well, the year of the Sex Olympics, which was a
Okay.
BBC TV thing. But they're the people because it's the future. They're all kind of painted and dressed a bit like this. I don't know whether it's just a coincidence or again it's this kind of 1968 zeitgeist thing going on. But yeah, that's basically it. That's our trip sequence, which is never mentioned again. The only thing that comes close to it is at towards the end of the movie, when some of the people have left, and we're basically left with, what are there's the like two guys. No, what are there? No, there's four of each, I think, by the end.
Yeah, yeah, it's gotten trimmed
And
down. I think
yeah,
two pairs of people have left. So yeah,
and they split off. So there's one guy with three women, and one woman with three guys.
yeah,
And then they all start kind of getting it on together, and the camera pushes in, and it reminds me a little bit of this sequence again. The sort of slightly, this is where we're getting close, I think, to that idea of this broken moral code, and a bit of they're all sort of writhing together. But when I was watching it, the first thing I thought was, "Let the shunting commence."
yeah, yeah, yes, yes. The society orgy sequence does seem
Yeah,
to come to. Yeah, yeah, and I was
thought
going to
that's where
say my
this was going.
disappointment with that sequence is it does seem to be the point since we're in like at that point the third act. I thought this is where the film is going to. The film has played a little bit with some nudity here and there. I thought that this was the point at which the film was going to segue completely into something where it was going to. I mean, granted, it's a 1968 film, but I
Yeah,
thought that maybe this is where it was going to get so close to over the line that you could see where the cuts were made. And I'm not sure if that was the intent, and they just had to pull back so far that it doesn't seem evident from what we can, what we were finally seeing in the finished product.
yeah,
But that really did seem like what was going to happen is we were going to have that over the line sexuality going on with these couplings of four people in two separate places, one out on the beach and one inside the hotel. It did seem like that would be the next step, and it would be the kind of day after everybody kind of looking at each other in different ways that would have added to the uptick in the way things were going. It would
yeah.
have been that would have advanced the story further, but the movie takes a different tack.
Yeah. I mean, I also do wonder because there are some quite clunky edits around this point, whether stuff had been cut out, maybe. It's hard to know
Yeah, I don't
if
know.
there's anything missing, and maybe it did go a bit further.
It does adhere pretty hard to the under 90 minutes, uh, which is all well and good considering that if they weren't going to be able to cross the line into more transgressive areas on screen because it was 1968, that's fine. But I don't mind the under 90 minutes thing with that. But if they had gone a little bit over that running time because they were able to be more transgressive, that would have been that could have had more of an effect on what they were trying to convey.
It'd be interesting to know what was in the script at least.
Yeah, yeah.
But, who knows? If anyone spoke to Dario Argento about this is 56 years ago now. So, there's every chance he doesn't remember it at all. It would be really cool, wouldn't it, one day if somebody published all of his scripts or something and we could read what was intended. But yeah, it's intriguing.
Well, that's the problem. The problem we run into there is that we would have to have translations, and there's always that shift from one language to another.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but it's intriguing, and it's not the greatest film ever made, but it's interesting to actually see some early Argento before he was Argento.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's on the cusp here. It's clear that he was in demand to a degree to contribute to screenplays, and so
Yeah.
this is him on his road to being the director himself. So
Yeah. Well, I think we should probably leave it there. If you want to watch this film, it is out there. You have to download it and find the subtitles and all that, but it's possible because we managed it. So if you really want to see the sexual revolution, you can find it. But as we're always saying, it would be great if somebody took it on and restored it and did something more, did something with it. But anyway, there we are.
Yeah, that's something that you and I are saying pretty regularly about every other film we cover here. So.
Yeah, every time. So thank you everybody for listening. That is it for our psychedelic season, and indeed for 2024. We are going to take the rest of Christmas off because it can get quite busy. We'll be back in the new year for more fun and adventures. I can't remember what we're doing, but it'll be good. So do stick around.
Oh, wait a minute. We could at least let people know what direction the show might go in the new year, what the next season would bring.
Yes. Go ahead.
I thought we had definitely talked about the whole rapiers and ruffles thing.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to get down with the Black Duke and his nefarious companions.
And his nefarious companions. Oh, I like that. That's a better title than Rapiers and Ruffles. I like the Black Duke and his nefarious companions. That's awesome.
Thank you. And at some point, we'd also like to have a go at covering the Houses of Doom films. So we'll see where we can slot that in.
Oh yeah, well that would be that would be fun to do. That there's a quick little 4-film miniseries
next year, and then that might lead into doing the Lamberto Bava films as well. I guess I don't know.
So weird because just last night, I seriously just last night watched House of Witchcraft.
Ah, there you go. Yeah, it would be good. We'll see. 2025 will be an interesting year for us.
Oh, in so many ways.
Now, I should just plug before we go, since the last episode, because I had started a little T-shirt thing.
Yeah.
But I did it with this other platform, and I just didn't like it. It was really clunky to make stuff on there, and the prices were really high. So then I cottoned on to, no pun intended, to TeePublic, and I set up a store last week on TeePublic, and I posted it out on our social media feeds. And we've already sold a few T-shirts. So
excellent.
So Rod, you might actually be the owner of the only T-shirt to be made on that other store. So that's like a collector's item.
To some degree, I will not be sealing it and hanging it on the wall. I will continue to wear it. Yes.
So if you'd like to check us out on there, they've had a sale, which by the time you listen to this is probably over.
Probably.
They were doing a Black Friday thing where things were cheaper, and a few people did buy some, which is nice. I've put a few different T-shirt designs on there. I'm always open to ideas if you've got some.
I like your director's thing. I like the...
I know. I mean, I've just nicked that, basically, because everyone does those list things, but I think they're quite fun. I quite like those. I'm waiting to see how long it takes for me to get a cease and desist letter about the Star Crash T-shirt, so... we'll see what happens with that one. But yeah, I'll put the link in the show notes, or just search Wild Wild Podcast on TeePublic and hopefully you'll find it. But yeah, and we've got other exciting potential things for growing the podcast in the works. But in the meantime, just like and subscribe and all of that stuff. Tell your friends. Don't take drugs. Have a great Christmas.
Yes. Don't believe that emotional attachment is a bad thing when you're involved in a sexual act. Don't take LSD. Don't attempt to commit suicide. Don't try to jump off a bridge.
If somebody invites you, to sit in their metal box, just politely decline.
Yes. Just ask them before you even see it. Just ask them. The only way I'm getting into any kind of box is if it's a TARDIS, okay?
Yeah. Or the phone box from Bill and Ted. I think I'd be all right with that one.
Which is essentially the same thing.
Which is basically the same thing, yeah. Okay, on that bombshell, thank you, everybody. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays and all the other things that we
Yeah,
might
Happy
say
New
at
Year.
this time of year. And Happy New Year when that comes. Rod, I hope you have a wonderful month.
Thank you. Same to you and your family. Thank you very much.
And thank you everybody for listening. And we will be back in 2025. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
I don't think that the psychedelic drugs are drugs at all in the sense they don't cure any physical illness. They're not drugs like heroin, they're not drugs even like alcohol. They're instruments which expand consciousness, they speed up the mind. Chemicals are the keys which open up and speed up, expand the mind.